Hey everyone, it is Dan here. This episode of Everything Hurts is a recording of a recent chat we had on Clubhouse, which is a relatively new app that facilitates voice chats in which audiences can easily listen and contribute. In this specific chat, we talk about when in your career you should begin criticizing your field and the potential career consequences of doing so. And we also have some really interesting questions and comments from the audience near the end of the episode. Let us know what you think of this format. If you like it, we'll do more of it. Hope you enjoy. We're going to get started and we're going to have a chat about when you can begin critiquing your research field. And this was inspired by a recent blog post from Moin Syed, and I hope I've pronounced that name correctly. This is a great blog post that we're going to link to somewhere. I'm not sure how, using Clubhouse. And we're going to chat about this. Essentially, the blog post was talking about this idea of when can you begin critiquing your research field. In the blog post, we hear a story about the author got up and did a searing critique about his field at a conference, and people spoke to him afterwards going, hey, that was really brave what you did, critiquing the field. And it led to a bunch of discussions, particularly from early career researchers who were like, well, I do see that there are problems in the field, but I don't want to do anything right now. So we're going to have a chat about this. We're going to chat it for about 30 minutes or so. And then what we're going to do is we're going to open up the floor for people to have a chat and to tell us what you think. So if during us talking, you have something that you want to share, put your hand up and then we can see that you want to chat. And then at the end, we'll get you on the stage, which is what they call it on Clubhouse, and we can hear what you think. But James, your initial thoughts about this idea?
Well, this is a wonderful, short, and entirely correct little blog post. It's only a few hundred words. I think I agree with all of them, which is not something that happens very often. It doesn't go into if I had written it, and I'm not saying that I could. It would probably be at the very least a little bit less stark. If I'd written it, I would have proceeded into why this is the way it is. I mean, it's all very well to tell people what to do. Perform these functions and your life will get better. It's a different thing to tell them how to feel. So let's start with the actual content itself. It's a reasonably simple premise. You have it's beautifully summed up here. I will act once I finish my PhD, once I get a job, once I get tenure, once I make full professor. In other words, it's the ever-increasing barrier for considering yourself to be someone who makes waves. Now, I would never find myself doing such a thing. I would never have the temerity, Daniel, to put my head above any parapet.
Not you, of all people.
About my opinion. No, absolutely not. No, I think it's inherent on the modern gentleman to be quiet and meek and generally behave themselves under all circumstances. So the point being, of course, is that what you're saying is I'm going to go until my interests are vested, at which point in time, presumably, I will have the courage to challenge my own interests. You won't. You can. There's very few truly radical professors. And generally, when you use a word like that, people expect you to study or publish on something social. But it's perfectly possible to be a radical anything within research. And I don't mean theoretically. I mean people who stand up to the structures around them and are willing to articulate the state of the reality of the work in a way which potentially inconveniences or annoys others. I mean, I've seen increasingly, certainly over the last sort of 10 to 15 years, there's a lot more direct engagement now from PhD students and postdoctoral fellows than there used to be. And it's gone hand in hand with new media, new digital media, things that people understand. But the headspace here in this article that is exactly how it plays out. And bonus fun part, the fellow appears to be wearing a rubber horse's head in his profile photo, which is something that I would support under all circumstances.
I think you made a really good point in that the new media is facilitating this. So I always wonder, 10, 20 years ago, you don't hear much about PhD students and postdocs making some waves. So right now is such a good opportunity because before, it's funny, whenever people are making waves, even now, I saw something online that it was the old argument. Yes, if you really want to make a respectful argument against a paper, you need to write a letter to the editor. You cannot use social media. We know how that goes down, and we've had that conversation before. This idea that you can't do that, but the thing is, quite often that is the only way that you can actually communicate that there is something wrong with this paper or there is something wrong with this field. Because previously there's a bunch, chances are you're critiquing the editor's mate. And once you send the letter to the editor, then they go, no, we're not going to post that. But now with the new media, we have ways of actually doing those critiques, both of fields and of papers. And it's a great opportunity.
It's become even more fun during the plague. Over the last year, I mean, as I've gradually worked my way out of academia, I have felt a urgency that I didn't feel before when it came to bad plague research. This probably has happened half a dozen times. Someone's published or preprinted something. It isn't any good. Now, in a normal scientific circumstance, that would be irksome, and we could rely on either the gradual accretion of results over time to pound that result into the dust, and then when we finally get to meet face-to-face down in 10 years, we could laugh about it and, no harm done. But now we're talking about research that immediately affects public policy all around the world, where people are listening and paying close attention. Doctors may be changing the way they practice. Governments may be changing what they fund and what they pay attention to. And suddenly there's this urgency. This crap goes unchallenged, and there is no counter force to this, especially when the challenge itself, the original paper, is a force of social media. I mean, this is the last year is the only time I've ever heard epidemiology on the news. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Grab anyone by the ear. Go down to the shops here at Davis and grab anyone by the ear and ask them what an R value is. It take three or four hits is going to be all you need. So this has changed now. In that world, in that environment, James, write a letter to the editor. Oh, sure, mate. I mean, first of all, there may not be an editor in the first place. We're talking about a preprint. Second of all, if there is an editor, 2 weeks to read it. And then as long as possible for people to write some kind of response to it, the original authors, who will, of course, have suddenly discovered under the couch the glowing wisdom on a carved tablet that says every single one of your perfectly logical critiques is wrong. 3 months later, right now, there'll already be a policy. So it's completely countermanded this idea of, well, just keep it quiet and go through the official channels. No, because I mean, it's not right now. It's not even coming out through the official channels. So the idea when you put on a huge social media blitz for the results of a paper, and you see it in the same spaces where it's allegedly inappropriate to criticize it, like it's just this is your playing field too now. This is you've suddenly discovered that there's interest everywhere for this, and you are out there trying to garner attention for it because you think it's the right thing to do, and you want attention for your enterprise. So it's so incredibly long dead, and these things only really stand as When there's social interest, there needs to be a social response. When there's academic interest, an academic response will do, but it's also committing you as an outsider to formally participate in the carefully managed processes of other people. And it's very hard to get anything critical published within some areas, some fields, some journals. It's very hard. We've had to. I've been on a criticism that I was the first author on, where we had to go over the head of the editor who was handling the paper straight to the person who ran the journal group and tell them what was going on. It wasn't a threat as much as this is how we perceive this, and we will be discussing it. I invite you to reconsider. I mean, that to me feels like that's the one you want to carefully consider. But until then, it's 2021. If it's inappropriate, if somehow I've become increasingly convinced over the years, Dan, of I used to mock you. Actually, well, I still mock you, but I used to specifically mock you for the idea that there were some channels that were illegitimate for speech and communication. That this XYZ, insert the latest way that humans communicate, this is stupid. And I've come to realize that you were right, and that my natural tendency towards making fun of things that I find distasteful and you like was not technically correct. It was just me being difficult. There's no illegitimate outlet for speech. And if your audience is a bunch of other scientists and a bunch of other scientists are there, that's the whole question done for me. That's it. It's over. We will use that format, especially if there's no restrictions and it's quicker and it has hyperlinks and you can get it off your plate in half an hour. It takes a phenomenal amount of time to produce some criticism in the first place because you have to be incredibly scrupulous. It's really, really difficult, and then you're taking a risk because if it's wrong, you look like a real tit. you feel like you've done something truly dreadful.
Well, very rarely have I seen someone doing that, going to the trouble of critiquing and then realizing that they're wrong. But here's the thing, though: anyone that's done that, when they realize they're wrong, they're very likely to go, "Hey, I was actually wrong with this thing." It's a ton of time to do this.
Yeah, you're very likely to only ever do that once. You know what I mean?
What are your thoughts in terms of retaliation? Because that is one of the biggest concerns when it comes to speaking out. I think there really are two different types of retaliation. There is a public retaliation, which often happens on social media. And there's also private retaliation where it's kind of if I ever review your paper in the future again, I'm sinking it so hard. I think from what I see online, especially when it's a very senior person punching down, that the crowd very quickly gets behind the little person, especially if they're punching down very hard. So I think publicly, of course, it's never nice to be called out publicly, but the fear of other people just going, hey, that response is a bit unfair, may restrict that. But what I think is the bigger worry is the private retaliation of what if this person is reviewing my paper? What if this person is reviewing my grant? What do you think about this worry about retaliation?
I think it's possible. I've heard of it happening. However, I think that there is a natural academic hesitancy and risk management bias that is relevant here, where you think, oh, if I've done that, what if? Like a lot of the time, what if? You know, it's like there's 4,000 people who are available for a grant panel. You're like, what if that one person turns up? I go, what if you understood odds, motherfucker? What if that? So there's that. There's a tremendous hesitancy towards allegedly offending people. And the other thing that happens is that people who retaliate there's certain fields where everything is very well socially policed. Everyone knows everyone, and you're not supposed to speak out of turn. You can see it happen at conferences, and you realize that the 6 oldest people in the room all know each other. Well. They know each other well. They're part of a little. They'll support it themselves out of reflex. They're friends now. There's a social structure. So it's possible. I mean, I have a similar attitude towards the fears around scooping, Dan. Of course it's possible, and it does happen, but I think people's risk perception on it is out of proportion of reality. And the third bias, I meant to say this a few minutes ago, the third bias is the fact that you think other people are thinking about you. You think you're living in their head and that they see you the way you see yourself, even if a tiny bit, even if they remember you just enough. Unless they're like me and they keep a spreadsheet, because they need to know who not to trust in future when it comes to assessing work. I had a case yesterday that I can't tell you any of the details about, but I was asked a question: is researcher X, do you know them? And I heard the name and said, are they at that university? And did they publish with someone? The paper is 10 years old. The field is not my field, very far from my field, or what was my field, right? And I knew who this person was instantly because they published with someone who's on that list. Now, it's not so I can go out and be as efficient in my vindictiveness as possible. It's because there's a lot of stuff to keep track of, and generally really bad science, the scary stuff that I still occasionally concern myself with, happens in patents, and it happens across labs, and it happens with collaborators of that person, or people who were in that environment, or a project that was run by those people, etc. You know what I mean? So I do that, but there's no one else going, Daniel has been a naughty man. I will write his name down. Give that shit 6 months. They'll have never heard of you. I've actually had that happen at a conference. I tore someone's paper up. I mean, it was bad. It was bad. It was very, there was a lot of overlap with the previous paper, about 50%. I thought it was a vintage piece of salami work, So I tore this paper up on a place where I was a named reviewer, I was identifiable, and I signed that review as well, if I remember correctly. So I gave that paper the business, yeah? Now, I met that researcher at a conference it would have been in the same calendar year, between early in the year and then September in the same year. They didn't know who the fuck I was. They didn't know who I was. They'd I've never heard of you. You're from Australia? How interesting. I am not. Ha ha ha. I mean, maybe that's a benefit of having a really generic name. I mean, actually, the weird thing, my surname's really rare, except it sounds amazingly generic.
Well, it's because it's
like if you could spell
name.
Smith with a Q.
Yeah. That's
it's just anyway. That's far from the point, Dan. Let's not get sidetracked on Clubhouse. My God, man, there are people listening.
Yes, and please put your hand up if you want to ask something in about 10 minutes' time. But look, one thing I want to talk about.
It's very hard, man. It's very hard to even do. It's very hard to even do that calculation. And what risk profile should you accept? Well, a lot of the time there isn't one. And here's the thing. Final thing, I promise. You will find out in academia, in industry, in whatever, even within the same any professional milieu. In general, if you pay enough attention, you will find out where the cliques are located. You may not be in them, but you will probably find out who carries each other's water.
If you're liking what you're hearing, there are a few ways that you can support the work that we do when everything hurts. First, you can throw some of your spare change to us each month, $5 to be exact, and you'll get access to a bonus episode every single month. There's also a $1 tier that will get you access to the Everything Hurts newsletter and the occasional bonus episode. Second, we've got a merch store where we sell hoodies, shirts, and coffee mugs, which is our most popular thing that we sell, so you can tell everyone that you listen to the best science podcast in the world. Third, you can tell your friends about the show by sharing links to episodes on social media. James and I love seeing these posts. For links to our Patreon page and merch store, check out the show notes. How do you approach things when it comes to critiquing your own field versus critiquing things that are a little bit adjacent to your field? I mean, personally, I feel a little bit, there are two factors to consider. I feel more confident critiquing my own field because I know the field. And I also have a motivation because I want to try and improve my own field. So I think it makes a bit of a difference between how these things are actually approached. But at the same time, you're more likely to have repercussions. But I think you've raised a really good point with the comparison with scooping. One little thing I want to disagree with, though, is with scooping, it's very black and white. You post the preprint and people aren't going to scoop you. That is, of course, someone hears about what you're doing on the grapevine and they do that scoop that other way. But yeah, look, but how do you approach things when it comes to, because when you first started out with critique, it was within your field, and we wrote our letter to the editor, James, which has been cited a stupid amount of times for some weird reason, but we were critiquing something within our own field and it was something we were comfortable with. But then for you, how did you make that shift?
Well, it's something the people who wrote the original paper were comfortable with. If I remember, they just failed to notice things about basic signal processing. It's like, we have gotten the thing as opposed to the thing cannot be gotten are two separate concepts, and it's not my fault that they can't do fucking basic DSP. That's what it came down to. Spent an afternoon on it, and now everyone keeps citing this stupid thing. Dan, I don't care. Look, a lot of methodological stuff is transferable. I enjoy the sort of challenge, and I enjoy a change of scenery, basically. I'm sick and fucking tired of writing the same thing over and over again when it comes to, I mean, if it's like biosignal analysis, autonomic physiology, heart rate signals, cardiorespiratory interaction, like, I'm bored to my ass of it, writing the same thing over and over again, which is also, I mean, that's not a good answer. That's not a normative answer to your question. I would say in general that I would have more hesitance about like shitting in my own bed when it came to getting into any kind of conflict, low level or otherwise, with people who I knew were intimately involved in stuff that I wanted to publish. I think I have been more hesitant about that in the past. Now, you've been very rude, Dan, because Jan has his hand up, and I want to hear what he has to say.
I haven't actually seen that, but yeah, Jan, please jump in.
So about who is allowed to critique, I think it's that if you are a stakeholder, if it's something that impacts you, then if you have done your homework, then you are allowed to critique. You might not even have to be in that field. And a lot of time, I feel the most impactful things will come from a collaboration between people who are deeply within the field and people who are completely outside. And also, it will be really good that people who are former insiders, that now they just no longer really insider, that they don't need to worry about loss of income, etc. And those type of combination will yield really amazing result.
Yeah, I like it, man. That has, look, for some of the really serious, like, court case level, multiple retractions, sort of high stakes data tomfuckery that I've been involved with has been exactly that. It's been people from a specific field walking my dumbass through it, telling me how it goes, and me trying to navigate the kind of mechanics of the serious criticism, understand the statistics and mathematics, if any is relevant, and try and retrofit what we see about inconsistencies, I suppose, in that work that I don't understand at all. You should watch me try to understand most topics within the life sciences. It's like watching a seal learn to play the harp. It's just slapping strings. Oh, I see another hand. This is fun. Dan, I'm being inclusive.
Yes.
You can't stop me because I started the room.
Go for it. Go for it.
It has been a while since I've been on Clubhouse. James, this is Louis Metzger. I actually get to talk to you in person instead of Twitter message exchanges. So I'm a follower of your work. And this topic here is quite interesting. I wanted to mention what you said about diving into the diverse fields of biology and critiquing them. There's usually just so much background information that one needs to have about a given field in order to understand what seems plausible and what doesn't. And this provides a significant barrier of entry for most people. And I'm wondering how that's going to change, if it's going to change, as access to scientific data hopefully become more prevalent and the process is perhaps a bit more transparent and democratized, especially the peer review process.
I can't see it changing much because, look, even the access to data out of context a lot of the time is it's not the party that everyone assumes it to be when it comes to the sharing of knowledge. A lot of the time, whatever insight is within something, whether it be for scientific advancement or the perspective of I will beat this paper heavily, for it has done many bad things. The knowledge that you need to do that is locked in pretty heavy. And I've seen too many examples of unbelievably fake data having been published for years in plain sight in reasonably easy to understand fields where the computational barriers to entry are quite low. To think that throwing that open more is going to result in more attention to an issue like that. I mean, I don't mean to be a pessimist, but I can't connect them a lot. What we certainly can say, I think that in the way that fairly simplistic arguments worked in the social sciences and some other areas of the applied sciences, things around sample size, the relationships between effect sizes and significance levels, and how you just have the basic trust. Like, how did you pull that result out of that few observations? A lot of the time, things that are that basic are missing from formal biological research. And I have had a little coterie of people who are in no way involved with my work. They're just people that I know who send me papers and go, look at this. This is that thing you were telling me about. Yeah, it is that thing. It is. You're starting to spot it. Yeah, you've got a sample size of 4. Well, cell size. You've got a cell size of 4 there and a cell size of 6 there. And yeah, you found one. That cell size of 6 was actually a cell size of 15, where they threw 9 of the observations away, it turns out. I mean, that's where it's at a lot of the time. And you can let it bug you, or you can try and help the people who are within that community try and understand the very basic substrata of what's presented in front of them. It's good fun. I like being sort of semi-retired from having to do this all the time, because people just write and I help them and then it goes away and no one ever threatens to sue me.
I think these things are going to take time, because quite a lot of the time when it comes to sharing data and sharing scripts, it's just signaling. Well, it's either A, signaling, or B, doing the bare minimum because the journal requires it. I was reviewing a paper a couple of weeks ago, and I was like, oh, gee, I'd really love to see the data, but it wasn't there. But then they had a reporting checklist, and buried within the reporting checklist was them going, oh, yep, the data's here. And there was a link to the data. But of course, the data didn't work because the link didn't work because it was, they didn't unlock it from being a private file. So it kind of shows that for a lot of people, that either they're not taking this thing.
I have done that twice.
Yeah, it's a common mistake.
I did eventually unlock it, of course, but it's just the fact that people generally don't notice.
I was so close to clicking request access, which would have immediately revealed that I was the reviewer, but I didn't do it. So I basically went, in the response, I'm going, hey, like before before I continue reviewing, I'll have to actually have a look at the data. But people are doing the bare minimum type of stuff for actually reproducing the sort of data that we need. So it's going to take a lot of time. But hey, I mean, which is not a surprise, I'm a little bit more hopeful than you for how quick this will happen. Other things have changed quite quickly when it comes to, I mean, this is something we didn't even hear of 5-10 years ago. So the fact that this is being discussed and most places are going, hey, you need to actually show where the data is. I think in a little bit longer, it's not going to take too much more time where people are actually taking this thing seriously. And now we have more and more journals who have a data editor, somebody who actually says, yes, here is the data, here's the script, and it does what it says it does. They don't comment on whether it's good, but they just comment whether it's accessible and whether the data, whether you get the same sort of results from what was described as the paper. But,
well, that is the traditional definition of reproducibility.
Yeah,
and it's becoming easier to do, and it's becoming more straightforward to perform. There was a movement a couple of years ago. I wish this had persisted, where journals were just being written into Jupyter notebooks. I don't know what happened to that. I'd love it if that was still going, simply because the entire thing's generated dynamically. That was dope. Dan, I'm adding more people to the conversation. Here's Evan. Hey, Evan.
Yeah, this is super interesting. I mean, I think it's interesting how scientists have a much different perception of how rigorous the scientific process is than the general public. I sort of whinge when people use this phrase, believe science. I think that's very popular to say now. Believe what about it? It's like believe, I mean, people use perfectly scientific methods to gain political power. So I don't see what people mean when they say unscientific, but that's a whole different thing. I guess, there was a recent result from, well, not super recent. There was a recent retraction of a paper on Majorana fermions, which are this like interesting excitation in certain condensed matter physics systems. And it was retracted because somebody had sort of excised some data because they thought it sort of crowded the plot. And then, the response has been interesting in that I think most condensed matter physicists are saying something to the effect of, well, the experiment is hard. Like, what are you supposed to do? And I think a lot of the funding agencies are going, this isn't working. We're never going to get it to work. It's all in all kind of disappointing. I want it to keep getting funded because it's interesting and beautiful work, but it's funded because people expect a commercial return on it. And I think science should just sort of be funded because it's science, but I would. So
that's an interesting retraction. You've actually managed to come up with a retraction that I haven't heard of, which is kind of awesome. Can you tell us a little bit more about this sort of what was the redaction that was involved here? So this is presumably this is physics or astronomy. What are we talking about here?
So it's a physics paper. The original paper was from the group of Leo Kallenhoven at Delft, and then it was celebrated as this huge result because Majorana fermions are sort of it's a Nobel Prize worthy result in our field. It's a particle which is its own antiparticle. Not that it's a new particle, but it's sort of an effective excitation of a system, kind of like a bubble is like an effect of water, but it's not literally a piece of water. And you could say like, oh, a bubble moves up, so it's its own isolated unit that behaves opposite the direction of gravity. We do that kind of thing a lot. But anyway, the problem is that it's very hard to actually detect these particles. So you detect signatures of them. And a while ago, somebody from Microsoft proposed a signature that you could see, and then somebody measured the signature in the lab and went, oh, we got it. And then months later, a theorist at Pittsburgh said, no, you didn't, like, the signature is not actually strong enough, and also the signature looks weird. You didn't detect what you thought you did. And now everybody's just throwing their hands up going, oh God, the whole field is dead because of this one result. And you're never, for whatever reason, one result led to a total discouragement of the entire field.
Is that common in your field?
Yeah, this is the flip side of trust but verify, isn't it? When you skip out the verify thing and you invest too much trust, eventually the arse falls out of the whole enterprise and we all have to have a cry. What was the question, Dan?
Is this common in your field? This sort of reaction to a single result?
I think it is, because we're used to being the kind of science where, like, either your error bars are so small you don't have to plot them, if that makes sense. We don't use p-values. Our argument is generally, oh, look at the plot. So
that's refreshing.
This isn't the case in high energy physics, where they have sort of error bars on their error bars. But the way we do things is either you show a gloopy plot which has some features and another gloopy plot that's a result of simulation, and you go, oh, look how similar they look. Or you have a model that's extremely precise, and then you overlay the points and you say, look, it's obvious. So that's our usual methodology. But I think this disconnect, the reason why nobody caught this is just because the theory is just so far out there. And the experimentalists, myself being an experimentalist, are really crappy at the theory. You have to dedicate your whole life to understanding the theory, and you have to dedicate your whole life to being able to do the experiment. So these things are just kind of at the edge of what we know how to do. So it just leads to papers that throw a result out and people go, oh, we got it. And then some theorist is like, nah, you don't. So it's just retractions working in a different way, I think, than they have in. I don't think anybody was behaving in bad faith here. I mean, besides the cutting data out, which is really ugly, but I mean, yeah, I don't know what to make of it. It's a bit scary.
Well, if you made me guess within the culture that I'm familiar with in that area, I would say that confirmation bias has never met a person that was smarter than it, and it's so often the case. You look right past what you don't wish to see because you know it's there, and that's the end of the story. So, look, in general, I mean, even for me, and I've ascribed bad faith to a lot of things, sometimes professionally, but even I never jump to you did that on purpose. It's almost always you screwed up. And even the level past you screwed up is you screwed up and you didn't really have you didn't even have the diligence to check whether or not you screwed up. So we use one sync as a verb in that context. Actually, a paper is one synced when you can't figure out which of the inconsistencies are the inconsistencies because they're interrelated to each other. So I don't think physics has ever been that bad, because I think someone would yell at you in the first 30 minutes.
There's been a lot of talk about psychology having physics envy, and this idea that so much about what we're doing is for us trying to be like a legitimate science like physics. So it's always interesting to hear perspectives from other fields. You can get so wrapped up in your own research field. So hearing other stuff, and that's what Twitter's great for, because stuff pops up from different fields. You're like, gee, that's interesting, and we can learn a lot from what other people are doing.
I think because quantum computing right now is being commercialized, and these Majorana fermions are, very, they're kind of the holy grail for quantum computing. I think because the money is coming in, it changes timelines and changes incentives. So that may cause people to react differently to something. So I think everybody has this idea of a short timeline in mind because that's what the VCs ask for. But science is sort of built on a long timeline, and people just come in with different expectations and different hopes. And then when something happens, there's disappointment and confusion. And we're sort of back. I think science gets weird when a lot of money gets involved. And then the second thing is that I think fields for a long time have had this math envy or physics envy there's the reason. I have nothing against Lacan, but I mean, Lacan has this thing where he talks about the algebraic topology of the sexes or something like that. I'm not, so I promise I'm not a Sokal affair guy. I like it. I like that stuff, and I think he has good points, but I can also see that sometimes there's, this happens.
Evan, you bring up an interesting point, though, about commercialization or expected commercialization of research, and how that affects both the research integrity, but also the ability of perhaps people participating in industry to critique their field. And what I noticed, so I spent a number of years in the now non-existent Novartis Infectious Diseases Division, which they closed down a year and a half too soon. Before COVID. But one of the really interesting things that I did not expect when working there is that reproducible research was greatly valued in-house because, here you are as an individual contributor, or maybe you're a group leader, and you're generating data that various different project teams depend on to move forward. And so it was almost as if there was a different selective pressure. That is, there was really no incentive to overhype one's results or to let confirmation bias be controlling, because these had to be real results in order for people, colleagues, to build upon them. And because the incentivization structure was to a large extent team-based, one was responsible to their team members for providing a solid basis for continuation of a project. And so, this isn't discussed a lot. And, one of the other interesting things is that, in the process of doing our work, we became aware of a number of academic papers, and in fact, not just papers, but entire laboratory outputs that did not repeat for fundamental reasons. Let's just say that. And
you are not the first commercial biologist I've heard say that. Let me just confine myself without telling tales out of school. You are not the first person who has gone into that environment. And then it gets worse. We'll have to do a whole separate podcast on there's the things we might have thugged up. Sorry, please continue.
No. Since being out of academia, I would just say the longer I've been away from being a grad student or a postdoc, the more I feel comfortable saying what I really think. And I'm not saying that industry is for everyone. And I think that an equilibrium, an ecosystem where industry and academia and nonprofits and government all use their strengths for greater projects than any one of them can produce is a good thing. But I do think that having that distance from one's training does provide a certain space, and also the fact that I'm not trying to get tenure, and I'm by and large not competing for grants with the good old girls and boys network. Who I might anger in the process. But anyway, it's something that has crept up on me, and then your choice of this topic really made me think, well, that's true. One does develop some distance and ability to critique.
Completely agree. How are we doing on time, Dan?
Yeah, we're good. We got a couple more minutes, so if anyone else wants to jump in,
superb.
That would be.
Yes, this is actually the time that we set aside to rather than getting in our own way and interrupting ourselves, which is great fun. I mean, this is I love it when the little hand appears. I don't like much about this app. Honestly, I think the interface is poorly designed. I continually find myself wishing for new functions, but I do get a certain kind of this will be fun feeling when the little hand goes up. It's that's good. There's something nice about that.
Lewis, I want to ask you a question. Now that you're in industry, what sort of things do you think academia should adopt more for things that is kind of standard that you see in industry?
Well, maybe two categories of things pertaining to Well, do you mean research practices?
Yeah,
or do you mean
research
management?
practices. How we do
Okay.
research.
I think that having method sections that are detailed enough for someone, quote unquote, skilled in the art to reproduce the work, especially if it's experimental work, this is really valuable. And it's not been helped by most journals asking for a condensed summary of the method section in the main paper and then providing space for the methods in the supplemental. But a lot of people don't make use of these supplemental methods as much as they could. And when I've been asked to review papers, if I don't think that the paper could be reproduced by someone skilled in the art, I recommend rejection or provisional rejection until the methods are clear enough that someone could reproduce that work, because it's so helpful to not only other academic labs, but is really important for people in industry, because we use these papers as a departure point for all sorts of research. And so it's really important that the work be reproducible. And when we do come across ones that are reproducible and have good method sections, we're always very, it's always a good feeling. And it also makes me think, well, that taxpayer funded research, that money was well spent, because now we can use this as a departure point. That's one thing. And then, the other thing just comes in terms of training. PhD programs, and I suppose many thesis-based master's programs, are generally, at the end of the day, a single contributor effort, right? Or a single primary contributor, the person writing their thesis or doing the work that supports their thesis. But in industry, really, it's a decentralized group effort. At least that's been my observation, both in big pharma and small biotech. And I think socializing graduate students to understanding that they're not going to be single contributors, in many different possible career trajectories they may approach, is really important, because I think that is undervalued in some corners of academia, and it's just essential for getting things done in an industrial setting, in my opinion.
Yeah. The team focus, like even as someone who doesn't have to produce science anymore, the headspace difference when you move into industry, it's something people continually emphasize out loud and everyone works towards. I mean, I'd like to think our company culture is okay, but I'm continually asked, what help do you need from me? Which is always, I cast my mind back to doing science for money at a university, and it was almost always the other way around. It's like, when are you going to send me, was usually how sentences began, and the reply was never sufficient. Maybe I was just a bad colleague.
Yeah, I can vouch for that.
This inspired me to think that a future topic should be about what people do not understand about industrial, because industrial is, or even the startup, which is different from industrial, but also is outside academia, that it's actually, I mean, I had a lot of super amazing things and also have some ugly things. But the thing is, there's so much misconception and perception from people who are outside of the industrial or startup. So therefore, that a dialogue about what people in academia that should know about industrial, or what you wish if you were in academia that you had known about industrial or startups, that I think that would be a wonderful topic. But the other point is, earlier, James, you mentioned that two things really amazing that I think a lot of scientists will be benefit from it if we have a talk about that. One is that you said people's risk perception is hugely out of proportion of reality. And also you mentioned that a lot of time people's attention on themselves is just in a way that's distorted, that because the world is not always looking at you and that. So I couldn't quite repeat what you said, but then those 2 points are very important, that it really pertains to a lot of things about motivation and why people in academia or in science choose to do or not do certain things, that I think is, and also I think it's a very amazing topic that should be discussed in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's something I feel like we could go into a tremendous amount of turgid detail on. Yeah, it's just everything's there are a lot of consequences of scale everywhere, and that really is one of the, on a personal level, that's one of the things that is actually, I've always taken a great deal of comfort in that, in the fact that a lot of the time people aren't looking, and unless you really make them look. It's like the idea that passive attention within this context will come to me and that I should fear it is, I'm not even sure where it came from. Maybe we'll get round to that, Dan. I kind of like that. It's cute. It's a bit this. I mean, it's a little bit nihilistic. We are all nothing, but you know, you should be used to that if you've heard the podcast more than once. I gotta go. I got a 5:00 meeting here. This has been fun. We should do this again sometime.
Hey, thanks for letting me drop in.
Yeah, of course.
Enjoyed it.
Thanks, Lewis. Thanks, Jan, and also thanks to Evan.
Thanks, Evan,
who was there before. But yes, let's wrap up. Thanks all. Have a good evening, morning, wherever you are.